webinar series. We are so excited to be able to offer these webinars to our monitors, friends, and clean water community as a chance to learn about clean water issues and stay connected during these strange times. I'm Rebecca Shore, the Mid-Atlantic Save Our Streams Coordinator for the Isaac Walton League. I have a few quick housekeeping items to review before I turn things over to Zach. First, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the Isaac Walton League YouTube channel soon. Keep your eye out on our website at iwla.org for information about the recordings, as well as the upcoming webinars in our series. Second, if you have a question during the presentation, you can type it and send it in via the GoToWebinar chat box. We will have time for a question and answer at the end of the presentation. We're expecting the webinar to run about an hour total, and that includes time for that question and answer. So feel free to send those in throughout the presentations. All right, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Zach Moss, our Save Our Streams coordinator for the Midwest.
Awesome, thanks, Rebecca. Just want to thank everybody for joining us today. I know we've got people registered and tuned in from the West Coast, the East Coast, and all sorts of places in between. So I hope you're able to pull something useful out of this presentation. As many of us are probably aware, agriculture sometimes gets a bad rap when it comes to discussions about water quality and water pollution. Chemical runoff, sedimentation, and erosion are common issues that are discussed in addition to several other things. But it's also important to remember that this same industry, this agriculture industry, with so many multidimensional players, holds the keys to significantly reduce common water quality issues, especially in hotspot areas like the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River and the Chesapeake Bay, where agricultural watersheds drain into. And so today we've got Tim Wagner, who's our Isaac Walton League Agriculture Outreach Coordinator, and Walter Lynn, the CEO of Understanding Ag. And they're going to talk about how healthy soils, plants, wildlife, water quality, and public health are intertwined, and how farmers and the agricultural system can work with Mother Nature rather than against it for a sustainable way forward. And in these crazy times, many of us are seeing that now more than any other time in recent history for most of us, we're acutely aware of the importance of our food supply chain, and that's being threatened due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we can look forward and be positive, knowing that farmers and other members of the agriculture industry have the keys to help us move forward sustainably, to help feed the world, protect our natural resources, and also protect the economy and the bottom line. So without further ado, I'm going to turn off my webcam and pass it over to Tim Wagner, our Agriculture Outreach Coordinator.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate the opportunity and happy to be here. I welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time today to join us. We hope to have an informative presentation for you. And like Zach said, hopefully we'll have some time at the end to answer some questions. And so we'll get started. I want to start this off from the very get-go by stating clearly that this program is not intended in any way to point blame at farmers for the issues we have with water quality in the US. This is more to help the public and members of the agriculture community understand the link between the agricultural practices and the quality of our waters, i.e. our rivers, lakes, and our groundwater. While there are many non-ag sources of pollutants and contaminants, agriculture does remain the dominant land use within the Mississippi River watershed and others within the Farm Belt. With that said, the agricultural practices related to our impaired waters are largely tied to a lack of awareness and information and cultural norms sometimes that dictate how an operator is performing on their land. But this is not a product of farmers not caring for the resource. I want to make that very clear. We are witnessing literally a revolution in farm practices that is happening out there, literally from the ground up, as more and more farmers obtain access to new information, better ways to do things, and to take better care of the soil and the land. So I want to make that very clear with everybody. So we're going to start off with just a little bit of history of soil in America and what some of the lessons we can take from that. It's critically important to know where we've been in order to better determine where we need to go. You can go all the way back to early 1800s, where, for example, in Illinois, where you could literally purchase farmland from the federal government for $1.25 an acre. But the sticky nature of the soils didn't work well for conventional plows that were being manufactured in the East at the time. And then in 1837, Illinois blacksmith shop owner John Deere perfected and designed a self-polishing steel plow that made it much easier to till these heavier soils in the Midwest. So as America expanded westward, Congress enacted 8 variations of the Homestead Act from 1850 to 1934 that resulted in more than 1.6 million homesteads on roughly 270 million acres of farmland throughout the U.S., a total of about 10% of all the land in the entire nation. With that came lots of changes and some pretty significant disasters. Particularly, we're talking about the Dust Bowl area in the 1930s. There was a combination of millions of acres of former grassland, now tilled for cropland uses, combined with more than 4 years of intense record-setting drought. This affected approximately 100 million acres, mostly in grassland plain states west of the 100th meridian. Estimates that many areas of the Farm Belt lost 75% of its topsoil during those times. It also affected much of America to the east, as huge dust storms called black blizzards were felt as far away as New York and Washington, D.C. And it had a profound impact on farming all over the country, because we finally began to realize for the first time that soil needs plants and root systems in order to stay anchored in place. Eventually, the government mobilized under the direction of FDR, the Soil Erosion Service in 1933, which was organized into the Department of Agriculture, and renamed the Soil Conservation Service the forerunner of what is now the NRCS, or Natural Resources Conservation Service.
Tim, I want
Yes.
one
Yes.
thing I was going to, this is Walter, I was going to add right there is this is the anniversary of the Dust Bowl this week. That, I mean, there's 1935, so it's kind of a deja vu moment that we're going through these slides right now.
Yes, that's exactly right. Thanks, Walt. So, moving up to the late 60s, early 70s, Secretary Earl Butz was Secretary of Agriculture at that time. He was noted for favoring large corporate farm operations with large-scale production of commodity crops, such as corn and soybeans. He was famous for saying farmers should plant fence row to fence row, and also saying get big or get out. He was also noted for abolishing some of FDR's programs as part of the New Deal, including conservation programs that paid farmers to idle land, the program now known as the Conservation Reserve Program. So, generations of farmers were sold on the notion that tilling is necessary in order to grow plants. I myself was a product of that. I grew up on a farm in the 60s and 70s and 80s with my parents in north central Iowa. We spent a lot of time on the plow or in the disc, harrowing the land, pulverizing it into fine black dirt, thinking we were doing the right thing. It was just kind of a cultural norm based on what we thought was the best thing to do, kind of seeing a sea of really fine black soil. We thought it was the right thing to do. But now we know some of those processes we were using then were not the best thing for the health of the soil. Habitat exists both above and below the soil surface. Slowly the word is getting out the tillage at nearly all levels destroys that microbial habitat of the soil that is necessary for soil to feed plants, process and store carbon and store water. Once that fragile ecosystem is broken, soil particles are free to roam. No tillage required in what we see as native prairie grass or native stands of prairie. They grow pretty diverse plant systems and have a healthy ecosystem both above and below. And that's the process that we're trying to emulate now, as we will talk about later in the program. So we definitely embarked on a new business model starting in about the mid-1930s and early 40s, where we put a much greater emphasis on bushels per acre rather than the bottom line or the quality of food. And that was certainly a contributing factor to where we are today. This map here shows the intensity of corn production in the upper Midwest, as we see, like right here in Iowa, where I'm located, and in Illinois, parts of Nebraska, heavy corn production, which continues today. Over the last 60 years, we've transitioned away from small family farms that raise multiple crops, including livestock raised on the land. So today we have these large expanses devoted to vast monocultures of corn, soybeans, and wheat, with little in the way of crop diversity in too many cases. And the overwhelming majority of livestock today is grown in confined feeding operations versus the way we used to do it, where it was animals out in a barnyard or in pastures. This map here also shows the concentration of soybean production in the upper Midwest as well. So it kind of brings us to today, where we have seen over the last 25 years or so a dramatic ramping up of tillage, of the use of synthetic fertilizers and synthetic chemicals to control pests. So basically, where we've taken the soil and converted it to dirt in many instances. The dirt that has extremely low levels of organic matter and little water storage capacity. Hence, we created a market for high uses of fertilizers and chemical inputs. And that's one of the things that we want to try to address with regenerative agriculture, which we will get into. Ray Archuleta, probably one of the best and most informed soil health lectures on the circuit today, has said it best: we do not have a runoff problem, we have an infiltration problem. This particular slide here is one of my favorites. I've shown many times. This came from Gabe Brown, who's considered by many to be kind of the godfather of regenerative agriculture in the US. He farms roughly 5,000 acres with his family outside of Bismarck. He took over his operation in 1991, traditional corn and soybeans operation, and he cooperated with the local NRCS office to measure water infiltration on his soil. And at the time, it was pretty much conventional tillage with hard pan type soils, and he was getting about a ½ an inch of water infiltration per hour. Fast forward to 2017, more than 25 years later, after he's been using decades of regenerative practices, he has increased that water infiltration rate in the soil by almost a 60-fold increase. That is a fairly common story that we're seeing throughout the upper Midwest and the Farm Belt.
Tim?
Yes, Walter.
One thing that's really interesting is Gabe has a book out there, Dirt to Soil. And when you look at that slide, it's a similar comparison. I mean, he's got the comparison there on his farm or his ranch, and there's a similar comparison on that. It's, I don't know, 55-fold better than his neighbors on his infiltration. So, I mean, his practices and his management are just unbelievable.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Walt. Yeah, this is a fairly common story we're seeing a lot of these days, particularly in the age of climate change and much heavier precipitation events, where we used to see 2 inches, a 2-inch rain was a heavy rainfall here in the upper Midwest Now it's not uncommon to see 5 to 6 inches of rain in an hour or so. And so healthy soil does have a huge impact on how we weather that kind of a storm. But, you know, as these problems have mounted over the last 30, 40 years, we've lost a lot of soil, and we continue to lose a lot of soil today. In Iowa, for example, we're still losing on average about 5.5 tons of precious topsoil per acre per year. And that is a very unsustainable model. That's one of the reasons why we're seeing a much stronger interest in some of these regenerative practices. Poor soil health, extreme pattern tiling, changing climate, degraded soil structure, increased runoff, little water storage capacity. These are having a direct impact on not only the land itself where the farming is actually located, but also those downstream. 2019 in Iowa, for example, was the 12th wettest year on record for Iowa. That came on top of already saturated soils from a very severe winter with lots of snowfall. And as a result, we saw a lot of flooding in both Missouri and Mississippi River areas and communities up and down both rivers last year. And predictions are we're going to see similar things again this year, hopefully not as severe as last year. It really depends on how saturated the soils are and what kind of storm and rainfall events we could encounter going into the springtime. But there's a lot of people who are very concerned about it. Of course, one of the major indicators of water quality coming out of this region of the country has to do, of course, with the dead zone, or what we call the Hypoxic Zone in the Gulf of Mexico. That's an area that grows roughly to about the size of New Jersey, or about 8,700 square miles of biologically dead water in the ocean every year. The graph that I've also included at the bottom of this map, I wanted to point out, first of all, you look at that map of the US, and that the area in green is the actual watershed for the Mississippi River. And you can see the difference of green versus red in terms of indicating which is farmland and which is urban city areas and landscapes. So you can see that obviously agriculture dominates that entire watershed. And then that graph below is charting the amount of nitrates that have been going down the river from the state of Iowa. The orange line is what is showing the amount of nitrates over that span of time coming from the Missouri into the Missouri River, from that part of the watershed in the state of Iowa. The blue is coming from what's in the Mississippi River watershed, roughly the eastern 2/3 of the state. And then the green line charts the overall contribution of Iowa. So the basic message here is we've seen since 2003, the amount of nitrates coming out of Iowa going down the Mississippi River has increased 100%. And in terms of nitrogen fertilizer, that amounts to about 900 million pounds of stream nitrates, or roughly about $300 million worth of nitrogen fertilizer going down the river. That's not a sustainable business model. In many ways, we've lost the relationship between livestock and healthy soil. And I think we're trying to get that back. As my good friend and farmer from Maxwell, Iowa told me, I don't think we understand what came off the land when we took livestock off the land. So that does tell us that we have a significant problem with the heavy concentrations of livestock in the state of Iowa and how much actual waste we're putting on the land. It used to be when the average farmer probably had somewhere around 300 or 400 head of hogs and maybe a couple hundred head of cattle on his or her farm. And oftentimes that livestock roamed free on the land during certain times of the year in rotational grazing patterns. And all that waste was going directly into the soil and utilizing the hooves of the animals to help integrate it into the soil health. Now we're taking all this tremendous amount of increase in waste from tremendous production in confined animal feeding operations and putting it on soil. In some places, we're seeing the soil biology being overloaded with too much nitrogen or phosphorus coming from that waste. So it's having some pretty significant downstream effects as well. This slide here I wanted to throw up because it just shows, it tracks the causes of fish kills in the state of Iowa. It should be pointed out that the DNR in 2016 documented actually more than 800 segments of Iowa rivers as having some kind of an impairment as defined under the Clean Water Act. We're also seeing a dramatic increase in beach closings at various lakes around the state during warm summer months due to dangerous blue-green algae blooms from lakes being overwhelmed with too much nutrient runoff coming into the lakes. And this graph charts basically the causes of some of the fish kills that were reported. So in 2016, they recorded 109 fish kills at various streams and rivers around the state. And the overarching leading cause of that was animal waste coming into that lake, or into that stream, I should say. So our current global food system is the #1 cause of climate change. I did not know this until I read this from Mark Hyman, author of Food Fix, within the last couple of months. I, like a lot of people, worked on a lot of energy issues over the years, and we were always under the belief that energy production was one of the major sources of carbon into our atmosphere. Well, it turns out all the things combined into agriculture is one of the leading causes of greenhouse gases, and the rise of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. So here I'm going to turn it over to Walter, because he is really one of the country's leading consultants and experts on this issue of rebuilding soil health with regenerative agriculture. And I think he has some really positive things and really fascinating things to talk about. Walter, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Tim. This particular slide has 9 different points on it. And what I would like to share a little bit here is, I think when we look at the regenerative word, so much of what we've seen in the past has been we've used the word sustainable. So our narrative is starting to, I think, change in our thought process. And sustainable, I think, is Gabe Brown has coached me very well on the differences between regenerative and sustainable. Where regenerative, what we're doing is we're creating a better resource as we with our management and our practices on our farms. And I mean, it's very, I mean, even some of the investment world is actually, stepping up and, making some nice noise about, this concept of regenerative agriculture. So, we can do a better job with our soils, our water, I mean, when you go to Gabe's farm in Burleigh County, North Dakota, I mean, he is going and comparing and showing you the differences on the different farms that are there. We have the less runoff that you talked about with the visuals that you had in your particular part of the presentation, Tim. And there's the increased organic matter, the potential to soil, for the carbon storage. So I mean, I think there's the challenge. One of the things that you had in that early on stage, or that early slide there, was I think that some of the manufacturers are starting to look at what did we create in 1837 when we did that plow. So but anyway, but I think that the farmers are looking at this, and once they become aware and start to be educated about it, there's an opportunity for more profits and I think we have to look at it's that profit comes in, different ways. If we can have better communities, we can have better well-being. Profits can be defined in different ways. So you want to advance the slide, Tim, please?
You bet.
This is a very, we've got some, you can see there's some dirt under the fingernails there, but, we take, I think sometimes we've been in a mode where we've tried to control nature and not respect it. And we have to respect it because there's more microbes in a tablespoon full of soil than there are people on the earth. So go ahead, Tim, please.
Walter, do you want me to show the undies?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, so as this slide indicates, when you've got that much microbial activity in such a small portion of soil, here's a tablespoon bite, for example, and just imagine living organisms more than there are people on the planet in that container. Those little microorganisms are hungry, incredibly hungry. And so one way to demonstrate the activity going on in that kind of healthy soil is what we call the soil Undies test. So what this is basically you can take 3 pair of conventional white cotton men's briefs and bury them in various stages of healthy soil or unhealthy soil. So I did this last year. My wife and I both did it. And I buried 3 pair, one in a conventional farm field, a cornfield, one in our garden that is permaculture, that has a lot of stuff going on, and then a 3rd pair in kind of a grassy prairie strip adjacent to the cornfield. So I want to show you this. So this is, if you can see that this is the pair that we buried in the conventional cornfield. Outside of being really dirty just from laying in dirt for 60 days, they're completely intact. You could actually wash these and wear them if you wanted to. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could. This is a pair that we had planted in that grass strip. As you can see, probably 50 to 60% of that pair of underwear has been completely devoured. This happened in about 60 days. That's a lot of microbial activity going on here. The only thing that's really still intact is the elastic strip in the waistband. The 3rd pair we buried in our permaculture garden, and we couldn't find it. We could not find the pair of underwear, completely devoured, even the elastic strip. So that shows you the level of microbial activity going on in healthy soil. It's just a great demonstration, and it really draws a lot of people's attention when we put it up there.
Right, and that's a very good analogy, Tim. We see that as I mean, you don't have to send that off to a lab or anything like that, but it's just a very good indicator of what you can do locally, or do it in your garden, in your home. It's like you did. So okay, thank you.
Yep.
One of the things that we want to make sure that there's a little bit of understanding here about is the soil health principles. Okay, and what we want to make sure that our audience understands here today, there's 5 points here, and there's been another one added, and it's called context, and I'll talk about that in a second. But what we're seeing here is that we want to use plant diversity whenever we can to increase the diversity in our soil. We've, I think, gotten away from that in how we have monocultures, corn and beans, in our current systems. Another piece of that, and Tim, had the pictures of the plows and the tillage piece there earlier, and we want to make sure that we're trying to disturb. We're actually disturbing our land and our soils less. Another one that's really key is that we want to keep plants growing throughout the year to feed this soil, because there's a whole process going on with photosynthesis. One piece I think that's really interesting is there's a gal that's out in Pennsylvania, Chris Nichols, and she makes a comment that, you know, say that the latitudes where Tim and I are roughly is that we probably have 300, probably 300 days of opportunity to photosynthesize in our, you know, in our agriculture. Well, a typical corn crop, it may be all we're really doing is maybe using that resource, maybe a little bit less than 40% of the time during the year. So there, you know, we're leaving, I guess, some, you know, some opportunity there to actually make our soils better if we would think about using using a plant to have some a root in that soil all year long. So, you know, that ties in to keep that soil covered. The integration of the livestock is a great addition also to make our system better, because when that cow or that sheep or whatever species is out there, when they're taking their tongue and you know, getting you know, a piece of that grass for their diet, and then it goes through their rumen, etc. Those are all positives to the system. And then the last one there is that we want to think about is you have to sometimes, you know, when we see people speak or hear something, you know, maybe, you know, we have to look at, you know, what is pertinent to where we are in, say, Northeast Iowa or Central Illinois, where I am. I'm in Springfield, Illinois. And so that's one of those pieces that we have to think about the context of, you know, of our local system here and what the possibilities are. So that's why I wanted to make sure that we you know, there's 6 principles, and they're very, very key to making this whole management system that we're talking about work. So go ahead, Tim, please. And here's a visual of you know, how and when I talked about photosynthesis, there's a whole piece here of how plants respire, what animals do, etc. And you know, there's you know, also some information out there that, you know, what the storms that come off the oceans, you know, that's maybe a big water cycle. And so when we've got everything working right with the respiration, etc., you know, when we increase the organic matter in our soils, we're actually creating a system where it's almost it's like a pump to actually help with our rainfall and some of the climate events that occur. So next slide, Tim, please. Here's one I think that we need to think about. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is something that you know, we hear a lot of talk about. Our soils have the opportunity, you know, I think some of the scientists that you follow, etc., they would like to get it back to maybe that pre-1850 parts per million there. So I mean, that's roughly about a 65-point move. Some of the things that I've been able to read is, I mean, this could probably be done in say 5 to 7 years if you actually kind of put some numbers to it. The carbon in the soil is so key to making this whole system work. And what, you know, there's a whole, I mean, Tim talked about the changes in the water holding capacity of Gabe Brown's farm in North Dakota. And you see different ranges of soil organic matter possibilities on water holding capacity. And, you know, is it 16,000? Is it 27,000? Whatever. So a number that I've come to you know, make those comparisons on is I look at a 20,000 gallon per acre on a 1% increase. So, you know, and using Gabe Brown's example, if he has 6% soil organic matter, that has the capacity to hold over 120,000 gallons of water per acre. And that is huge. So, you know, that flooding picture that Tim had in the Quad Cities and Davenport. I mean, you know, when you think about what's the possibilities, you know, up the river in Pierre, South Dakota, or in Minnesota or in Iowa or whatever, if, you know, we have the opportunity to help coach our farmers about what the possibilities of changing that soil organic matter. And it is something that can be done, but there's weather, which is, I mean, context on how fast that can be done. The food security issues, I think that we're starting to see that with the COVID. The group that I work with right now, Understanding Ag, had an amazing presentation by one of our partners last Thursday. And I mean, this is not a paid political announcement for Understanding Ag, but the implications of that and where the different systems are with that, that's something that you might want to, our audience might want to go and check out because the tables have turned in that whole process. Another thing that we're seeing is the nutrient density of our food is changing. And why don't you go ahead and advance to the next slide, please, Tim.
Walter, there's one thing I wanted to throw in here on this particular slide where we talk about the increase of water infiltration and water storage capacity with just a 1% increase in soil organic matter. The most common reaction I hear when that kind of figure is quoted is, well, won't that make the land actually too wet to be able to get out and actually plant and harvest and so forth? And actually the opposite is true. We're seeing plenty of research out there and plenty of real life examples where some operators who are using some of these soil health processes on their land are able to get back into the field days before their neighbors who are not practicing some of these methods. So it does make a big difference in terms of soil stability. So
yeah, just one other thing there, Tim, let me share with you. I was talking to a farmer in West Central Indiana the other day, and I mean, it was a week ago Tuesday, and you know, he's been going down this journey probably 10 plus years, and I mean, the biology that we were talking about when we had the tablespoon of or there's more microbes in the soil that you were talking about, is his soil temperature a week ago was 64 degrees at 4 inches. So, you know, the possibilities of that when that biology gets humming, you know, and he's into the system, et cetera, it's huge. Another piece of this is the University of Illinois has Abe Lincoln, when you were talking about the Homestead Act, Abe Lincoln had, he did 4 things for agriculture, and one of the 4 was the whole deal with the land grant universities. Okay, well, along in, I don't know, in the 1870s, you know, that's when the University of Illinois got going, et cetera. Well, if you take the soil organic matter change on some of the, one of their long range plots there, it's 50% of what it was in the 1870s. So it's a major deal, this soil organic matter, and there's the whole possibility of changing, what's that resource. So go ahead and advance the next slide. This is, I saw the next two slides from a presentation several years ago in New Mexico, and you look at this, and this is a study. I think it comes out of England, and they've done this. But look, I mean, there's 5 different minerals there, and the decline in those minerals, for over a 50-year period is unbelievable. I mean, it's 76%, 46% for the calcium. Magnesium is down 24%. And I mean, these are all key minerals to help our bodies function better. And that's just in the vegetables. One piece, there's a more current study that was from 1975 to 2010, and the calcium, I mean, it lines up, but in 75 to 2010, the calcium in just broccoli was down 54%. So why don't you go to the next one, which shows the meats. Yeah, here's the deal on meats. There's 10 different kinds of meats here. The copper being down 24%, the calcium 41, iron 54, magnesium 10, and the potassium down 16. So these are major issues that are in our food system. Okay, please go to the next one, Tim. Healthier soils makes healthier people, and I'm not trying to I don't want to say that I'm not compassionate for people that are ill or have cancer or whatever, but I mean, when we look at what the possibilities are, when we look at a different food source, we're trying to avoid going to, say, our local cancer institute. And so I mean, there's some wonderful things that are going on at that institute, but I mean, I think that if we take some responsibility and look at our food source a little more in depth, maybe we can have some different choices for our society. So this piece about the soils it's a system, and it's so tied into our water quality, our food quality, etc. And right now we're seeing some examples with COVID about how fragile this piece is. I mean, 90-some% of the food that we have, I mean, I think it's about 95% of the food that we have in the state of Illinois, it comes in here by wheels. And, I'm not saying that we're going to get it where we're going to be self-sufficient in Illinois or whatever, but I mean, I think that, the risks that's out there right now, I think that people are really starting to, ask some questions about, our food system, and where we are. So, the water quality is tied to that water holding capacity in our soils, and we can help manage that a lot better. So I think that those are all, I mean, it's a system, and we've got 3 items there, and they're tied together. And so I think that's the piece that we're looking at. And so what we're doing today is we're looking at that we're trying to bring about awareness to our audience today, and that's the education, that's the social piece, and then there's the ecological piece that Tim is so adept at presenting, and then there's an environment or economic piece that comes together, and it's all tied together, and how we put all that together for our overall well-being a noble task that we can work with, and we have to engage our, the audience that we're before here today. So anyway, why don't you go to the next slide, Tim, please? So, I mean, one piece that Tim and I are asked about, well, some of you guys are talking about just about ag all the time or whatever, but what can we do in our communities in Des Moines or Springfield or Indianapolis or Gaithersburg, Maryland, or Baltimore or wherever? What are some of the things that we can do? And as people that are living in town or in the cities or whatever, but the community supported agriculture is a possibility. The CSAs are kind of a subscription type source for vegetables and fruits and sometimes meat for your families. Seek out the farmers market. I mean, the quality is there. I think people are right now with COVID are looking at maybe there's we would like to maybe be part of a system that handles our food maybe fewer times and know the specific source of where that's coming from. Another one is do something in your backyard. I mean, maybe it's a couple tomato plants and a few root vegetables, etc. My CrossFit gym, they have a community garden that we have for our members in our CrossFit gym. And step up and work to educate yourself and your community about what that term regenerative agriculture means. I mean, Tim and I were kicking around, what we want to do to help bring this about. There's a couple really good videos out there that are conversation starters, maybe for a group that you're a part of. Farmer's Footprint is one, The Biggest Little Farm. Those are all wonderful conversation starters for, say, a group that you're a part of. And then you also may want to think about, how you look at maybe your investment strategy personally. When you see companies like BlackRock and their CEO stepping up, I'm not trying to make an investment recommendation, but there's some I think there's some choices out here that people are starting to be aware of. Maybe we need to look at how the genetically modified organisms, the GMO, are a part of our food system, and try to minimize the amount of processed food in your diet. And then the last one that you can do is look up voting records and vote what you believe in and what you stand for, because I think there's an opportunity to actually make some changes there also. So next slide, Tim.
We are done and ready to take some questions.
All right. We've had several questions rolling in. Folks, if you have questions now, you can also pop them into the question box. We've got about 10 minutes to answer some of those. We had one short question that says, can you all talk a little bit more about incorporating livestock for better soil and water?
Walt, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, I think one of the things that we want to think about is there's a piece right now that I think we need to look at the systems that we have that we've, I'm gonna say, outgrown. I mean, when the buffalo were here and we had bigger herds of the buffalo, the prairie ecosystem was, a very productive system, and it fostered that whole ecosystem of that Tim showed with the the prairie picture, etc. So I mean, the diversity that was a part of that is something that I think we've lost respect for. And I think there's a piece right now. I don't want to. I think that there's some amazing things that we're starting to see about the comparisons of some of the grass-fed beef in our diet, et cetera. I think oftentimes that we will beat up beef when we're really not peeling back the onion as strongly as we should and look at the source of the beef, et cetera. Because I mean, there's some health attributes with grass-fed beef that we need to help bring about awareness for.
Yeah, very true. Next question, Zach.
Yeah, we had one person who's asking, what is the best way to reach the farming community? I think they're talking about in terms of communication and outreach. They asked a person or if there's some other way.
You know, that's a really good question, and I get asked that a lot. And I think one of the best ways is if you're just interested in learning about these processes and then actually having more conversations with farmers in your region about this. One of the organizations that is probably more consistently in touch with local farmers are your soil and water conservation districts. We have like 105 of them here in Iowa, for example. Mostly are associated with individual counties, but they typically hold regular, consistent monthly or regular, consistent scheduled public meetings. Anybody can go to those and just sit and listen in. I would encourage anybody to, if they're interested, to go and introduce yourself and meet some of those folks and talk to them. And they're going to introduce you to some farmers who you may want to meet. And it's all about just creating conversations by building relationships with people you haven't had any contact with before. And I think that's probably one way to do that. Also going to farmers markets, like Walt mentioned in his list of things to do. Go to farmers markets and talk to farmers and what they're doing. Get information from them. There's certainly a tremendous resource in this thing. So those are a couple of ways I would suggest people get involved.
May I add a couple of things there, Tim?
You bet.
Yeah, one thing I think that this is the whole piece about awareness and communication. I think is a very key thing that we need to understand. And one thing I think that's out there is number one, I think that the demographics of land ownership is a major thing that we need to understand. The male species typically predeceases the females oftentimes. So lady landlord groups are something to think about. And where I'm going with that a little bit, it's a real good friend of mine last year was the president of the Illinois Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers. And I think that we need to encourage, that whole, like Tim's comment about networking, et cetera. We need to think about how we network in that deal because, he made a comment that he was in, it's typical management is more in Central Illinois, but, he opened up a conversation with some lady landlords in Chicago about, the options that they have. You know, another one is that's out there is there's some really good resources. University of Illinois has a lease form that is real friendly to this cause, et cetera. So anyway, there's some really good resources out there, and you know, we have to share what those are to the network that has the possibility to help move the dime on this.
This isn't really a question, but just wanted to share. One of the listeners commented that she dropped a worn leather gardening glove in her compost bin one autumn, and the next March, all that was left was the piece of the kitchen glove that she had glued onto one finger and the polyester thread used to sew the glove. So it seems like people might already be trying the Soil Your Undies test accidentally at home.
That's great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yep.
Yeah.
We also had a couple questions about cover crops. Somebody asked, do you think cost share options for planting cover crops is a good idea? And if so, for how many years? 3, 4, or 5?
That's a really good question. And actually, we have programs going on both here in Iowa and Illinois that are kind of based on that model. And what they are is they are state funding appropriations that are doled out on a somewhat limited basis, but that are actually giving farmers a $5 an acre discount on their annual crop insurance premium. As long as they can certify that they're using cover crops on X amount of acres, they can get a discount on their crop insurance for that amount based on the amount of acres that they're using cover crops on. That's one way, and it seems to be working pretty well in terms of they've had, I know in both states, in Iowa and Illinois, they've had, Illinois just instituted this program just last year, and they only had a limited amount of money. I think it was $300,000, and the subscription for that, they ran out pretty quickly. And I think there's talk about trying to get that doubled this year. So that's one way that they're doing it. Walter, I don't know if you had any other ideas on that.
Yeah, one thing too, I think that there's a whole, I think sometimes we see a process maybe in a watershed that is maybe there's a funder and they can actually maybe do it where you know, there's some creativity that occurs with that, and you know, maybe it's a deal where, you know, maybe it's a 5-year program and they would do it where it would say the cost share would maybe drop off over a period of time, because you know, there's some arguments out there that you know, with some of the government programs out there, the working lands programs, that we need to probably maybe foster that a little bit differently in the time frame. Maybe the contract should be maybe longer, because if there's some hiccups in the process, then does the implementation after the contract runs out, does it go on?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some structure things that I think that we need to have a little better understanding on.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, we're almost out of time. I'm gonna ask one more question and then I'll wrap up. And this is kind of a larger, bigger picture question, so just answer it as well as you think you can. Someone asked, what are the limitations of regenerative agriculture? Is it a practical method for every farm in the U.S.?
Walter, I'm gonna let you take that.
Well, I guess let me share with that. Okay, I'm working I'm going to I guess give some context to the impact of this. Okay, I mean, the group that I'm working with, okay, they do work. We're engaged as helping in the prairie provinces of Canada, okay, Mexico, so that's north to south, and we're working from California to the Carolinas to Florida. So there are opportunities in every state in the union to make a difference with regenerative agriculture. And our team every day is being, we get calls from all over the United States, from all over Canada, et cetera. So I think regenerative agriculture has some presence and some impact that can be created no matter where you are in the United States.
Yeah, I would just add, soils vary a lot from all over the region of the country, all across the globe. But healthy soil is a common denominator, I think, no matter where you are.
That's correct.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so those principles that we talked about can be applied in some fashion or version, no matter where you are.
Correct.
Awesome. Well, I think that will wrap up our webinar. We've got a lot of questions. I apologize we couldn't get to all of them. But you see Tim and Walter's emails there if you want to reach out to them specifically and carry on a conversation or ask your questions if they didn't get addressed. But I just want to thank Tim and Walter for taking time to educate us all today and answering some of these great questions. And wanted to share with all of our participants that just a reminder that this webinar was recorded and we'll be uploading it to the Isaac Walton League of America YouTube channel here in the next couple days, hopefully. And we'll also be sending out a follow-up email with that link so you can view that and share it as you please. And I also had a little reminder or a recommendation maybe during social distancing that the Soil Your Undies test that Tim was talking about can be done at home and can be done with kids. If you're interested in implementing that as something to do and pass the time, as well as learn a little bit. So thanks everybody. Please join us next Wednesday, same time for our Earth Day webinar. And today we looked a lot at the relationships between land and water in rural areas. And next week we'll be looking into more urban areas. So our subject will be landscaping for clean water. And we'll be learning about how the Muddy Branch Alliance is helping property owners in the Washington, D.C. area, as well as what the city of Clive here in Iowa is doing from a municipal perspective to help with water quality and water quantity in urban communities. So you can find that link at iwla.org and you can register there. So thanks everybody for joining. Thanks again, Tim and Walt, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
everybody.
day.